My girlfriend said, "I need you to hold space for me tonight." I replied, "I understand. Space is important." When she came home at 4 a.m., her key didn't work. I texted back, "I gave you all the space you needed." Outside, the whole thing was a battle fought with dictionaries, not fists. I'm Lucas, 34 years old. I build back-end systems for a tech startup in San Francisco. My life is binary. Functions work or they fail. My girlfriend Lena was the perfect chaos to my order. She was 32, a social worker, and she spoke fluent therapy speak. Lena used clinical terms, boundaries, emotional labor, self-care, to completely justify her selfish behavior. She never said, "I don't feel like making dinner." She said, "I'm depleted of emotional resources and I need you to hold space for my recovery." And I, the conflict-averse programmer, always went along with it. I allowed her to weaponize therapeutic language against my logic. I enabled her independence by paying 80% of the rent and handling all the maintenance. The core problem was that her demands for space and self-care were always one-sided. She needed space when I needed comfort. She needed emotional labor when the kitchen needed cleaning. Our final conflict started subtly. I had a massive deadline at work and I asked her to take on the grocery shopping for one night. A simple request. She sighed, a deep, performative sigh that indicated I had just asked her to climb Mount Everest. "I can't, Lucas. I'm hitting a wall. I need you to hold space for me tonight." That phrase, that clinical jargon used to excuse pure laziness, snapped something in my logic centers. I knew she was going out with her friends, the group that always encouraged her worst entitlement. She wanted me to stay home, cook my own meal, and feel guilty about her absence. But I just looked at the woman who demanded radical autonomy without any corresponding accountability. I realized I couldn't beat her emotional arguments with logic. I could only beat them with literalism. "I understand, Lena," I said, my voice completely flat. "Space is important." She smiled, convinced she had won the round. I went straight to my laptop, not to code, but to design a new system of consequences. She asked for space. I was about to give her the infinite, literal space she deserved. I had the receipts, the apartment lease, and a perfectly good electronic lock system. Space is important. That was the last true statement Lena heard from me before her reality collapsed. She left the apartment shortly after, clearly eager to enjoy the space I had granted her, likely believing I would be home suffering quietly. But as soon as the door clicked shut, I went into operational mode. I am a back-end system architect. I know that contracts are enforced through code, not emotion. The first step was securing the system perimeter. I contacted the locksmith immediately, citing a lost key incident. I paid for a complete change of the electronic lock system, the only locks I trusted. I made sure to program the new key fob, which I now held, to be the only functional key. The old key Lena carried was now just a piece of useless metal. The second step was the financial severance. I logged into our joint checking account. I transferred my entire share of the savings, meticulously leaving enough to cover the next month's utility bill, the only shared obligation she contributed to. I then executed the final, non-negotiable financial move. I canceled the supplementary credit card I had given her. She had maxed it out 3 times in the last 6 months, always justifying it as necessary self-care expenses. The financial well she thought was endless was now dry. I knew she was incapable of supporting her spontaneous lifestyle on her sporadic income. She was used to the silent subsidy I provided. Next, I packed. I didn't take any furniture we had purchased together. I packed only my clothes, my specialized programming gear, my personal finance documents, and my favorite coffee mug. The process was methodical, clean, and silent. I treated the apartment like a compromised server, removing all proprietary data before the system was fully shut down. I called a professional moving service and scheduled an early morning pickup for my belongings. I told them to leave the large, empty apartment for the final tenant to manage. As evening approached, I cooked a lavish meal, but only for myself. I opened a bottle of wine she loved, poured a single glass, and ate slowly, savoring the flavor and the peace. Around 11 p.m., I received her first text. "Hey, still out. This space is exactly what I needed. Thanks, babe." I smiled at the text, the subtle irony of her using the language of self-care to justify her absence. I replied with two simple, non-committal words. Take your time. I knew she would be home late. I knew she would assume I was asleep, ready to forgive her. I was ready too, but not to forgive. I placed the old key fob onto the kitchen counter, a silent trophy of the system that no longer worked. I sat in the dark waiting for the clock to hit 4 a.m., for her arrival, and for the sound of the useless key turning in the lock. The silence after 2 a.m. was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the quiet of a controlled environment waiting for detonation. I sat in the dark, my laptop a single source of light, finalizing the last details of my escape. I treated my departure like a complex migration of data. Nothing left behind, no trace of my existence that could be exploited. First, the documentation. I logged into my separate email and drafted the final separation letter, clearly stating the termination of our cohabitation agreement. I attached the time-stamped bank statements proving the full extent of my financial contribution versus her sporadic payments. The evidence was crucial. I needed to prove that my steady income was not the problem. Her lack of accountability was. Next, I handled the shared assets. The apartment was filled with furniture we had chosen together, but I wasn't interested in a messy legal fight over a sofa. I photographed every major item, the couch, the dining table, the expensive television. I attached the photos to a document, clearly stating that all communal items were being left for her. I was liquidating the emotional investment by turning it into a burden of possession for her to manage alone. The most satisfying part was the digital quarantine. I logged into every streaming service, every shared subscription, and removed her access. I deleted her profile from my Netflix, changed the password on the home Wi-Fi, and remotely wiped the home automation app from her phone. She wanted space to operate independently. I was ensuring her digital independence was as isolated and inconvenient as possible. I packed the last of my things. I left behind her expensive perfume, her designer clothes, and her chaotic clutter. I was shedding the physical symbols of the life she had created with my money. I only took my personal laptop, my work equipment, and the one physical piece of evidence of her manipulation. A small journal where she had listed the exact therapeutic phrases she planned to use on me during our conflict resolution. At 3:45 a.m., I received the first warning sign of her return. A notification popped up from her Uber. Rider arriving in 10 minutes. The final seconds were measured and precise. I walked to the kitchen counter and placed the new key fob, the one that actually worked, into a locked drawer. I put her old, useless key next to the note I'd prepared for her on the counter. I walked out the door, moving quickly but quietly, carrying my heavy duffel bags. I didn't use the elevator, I used the stairs, needing the exertion to clear my mind. I drove out of the city and parked my car 2 blocks away, overlooking our building. I watched the clock tick to 4 a.m. I was waiting for the perfect moment, the sound of her key failing in the new lock, to deliver the final, brutal piece of text. The digital clock in my car hit 4 a.m. precisely. I watched her Uber pull up to the curb of our building, the headlights cutting through the San Francisco fog. Lena stepped out, looking exhausted but satisfied, quickly retrieving her small designer overnight bag. She walked confidently up the path, inserted her key fob into the electronic lock, and frowned. She tried again. Nothing. I watched her face even from 2 blocks away as confusion turned into irritation. She jiggled the key, muttered under her breath, and finally realized the truth. The lock had been changed. She pulled out her phone, dialing my number. I let it ring once, twice, then sent the final decisive text. The message was concise, brutal, and used her own language against her. I texted back, "I gave you all the space you needed." Outside. The moment she read the message, her entire composure shattered. She didn't call me back immediately, she called her best friend, Maya. I watched her pace frantically outside the front entrance, her conversation devolving into hysterical whispers. She was screaming about me, about the broken key, about the fact that she had nowhere to go at 4 a.m. I knew the initial panic was purely logistical. She needed a roof and a bed. The emotional reckoning, the understanding of why I did it, would come later. After 10 minutes, she stopped yelling at the phone and sank onto her knees near the planter box. She was sobbing, tears of pure physical exhaustion and disbelief. I then received a barrage of texts from her best friend, Maya. Maya. Lucas, what the F is wrong with you? She's sobbing on the sidewalk. She needs to get inside. Maya, this is cruel. Open the door right now. I replied only to Maya because she too needed a quick dose of reality. I filed for divorce this morning. I'm no longer responsible for her space. She wanted autonomy. She got it. That reply was enough. Maya's texts stopped immediately, replaced by a call from her own Uber driver. I watched as Maya's ride pulled up, picked up a defeated Lena, and drove away from the building. The complex was silent again. The only physical proof that the collapse had occurred was the small, abandoned designer handbag Lena had left behind near the mailbox. I waited 10 minutes, drove my car back to the garage, and walked back up to the apartment. The air inside was clean, quiet, and finally my own. I had successfully executed the system shutdown. The silence inside the apartment was the most profound change. I didn't bother unpacking. I sat down at my laptop, fueled by black coffee and the cold clarity of the morning. The battle had shifted from a logistical problem to a legal and ethical one. I first confirmed the actions of the early morning hours. I called the moving service I had booked and confirmed the immediate retrieval of the large communal furniture I had left behind. I didn't want any ambiguity about what was mine and what was abandoned. I then opened the document I had prepared months ago, the Accountability Protocol. This was the detailed spreadsheet itemizing every major financial transaction from the last year. I detailed the costs, the $8,000 I paid for her credit card debt that she disguised as investment losses, the thousands spent on networking events that were purely social drinking, and the fact that I had consistently paid 80% of the rent while she preached autonomy. She had accused me of being cheap. The data proved I was her primary financial engine. The next wave of texts started around noon. Lena had recovered from the initial shock and was now fully in the denial and rage phase. Lena. You're an abusive monster, Lucas. You can't just throw away 4 years. I'm calling a lawyer for illegal eviction. Lena, I'm telling everyone you had a mental breakdown because I asked for space. I let the texts pile up, savoring the sound of her manipulative language hitting a dead end. I knew that every word she sent was just more evidence for my case, proof that she would use any language, even legal threats, to avoid accountability. I finally responded, but not to her. I replied to Maya, her best friend, who was actively being used as her emotional proxy. I sent Maya the link to the cloud document containing the Accountability Protocol. My message to Maya was simple. I think you need to see the definition of emotional labor I was actually performing. This is not a breakup. It is a system shutdown. I knew Maya was the weak link. She was a social worker. She would understand the gravity of financial abuse and systemic manipulation. The truth, backed by spreadsheets and bank dates, would sever Lena's last true social tie. 2 hours later, the moving truck arrived. I supervised the removal of the communal furniture, the sofa we picked out, the dining table. The apartment quickly became a cold, echoing shell. Just as the last piece of furniture was loaded, I received the final, devastating call. It wasn't Lena. It was her mother. Lucas, what is going on? Maya just sent me this spreadsheet. Is this true? It's all true, I confirmed. I gave Lena the autonomy she wanted. I removed the subsidy. She chose to be outside. I facilitated it. The silence from her mother, the silence of total moral defeat, was my only true satisfaction. I hung up, changed the locks one last time, and walked out, leaving the empty apartment as a monument to the end of my quiet servitude. The phone lines went silent after I sent the final data package to Maya and her mother. I knew Lena was completely exposed. She had lost the emotional war with me and the credibility war with her own social circle simultaneously. The final legal step was non-negotiable. I drove out of the city to meet my lawyer and submit the dissolution paperwork. While I was signing the final asset disclosures, I received one final unexpected message. This time, it was from Lena's work email. Lena, work email. Lucas, I have terminated the lease on this apartment. I'm moving out by the end of the week. Please send the security deposit to my personal account immediately. The audacity was breathtaking. She was attempting to claim the security deposit for an apartment she had nearly driven into foreclosure with her sporadic payments. She thought she could execute a final financial grab and leave me with the logistical cleanup. I smiled, a cold, surgical smile. I replied directly from my lawyer's office. The security deposit will be allocated to cover the late fees incurred on the utility bills I covered for the last 6 months. The remaining balance is currently being processed as a repayment for the cost of furniture liquidation. You have no claim. The apartment lease is mine. I knew the response would send her into full panic mode, but I didn't care. I had already taken possession of my own narrative. That afternoon, I returned to the apartment building. It was eerily quiet. The moving crew had already finished their work, the large communal pieces were gone. I found Lena sitting on the bare, dusty floor of the living room, surrounded by her small pile of personal belongings. She looked small, defeated, and completely without a plan. "You took everything," she whispered, her eyes devoid of their usual fire. "You left me with nothing." "I took nothing you didn't force me to pay for," I replied, my voice calm, maintaining the distance of a neutral observer. "You wanted autonomy. You wanted freedom from my opinions. I simply ended the financial subsidy that was compromising your independence." She tried one last time to appeal to my guilt. "We had 4 years, Lucas. You're throwing it away because I needed one night for myself." "You needed one night and you wanted me to hold space for your irresponsibility," I corrected. "The 4 years were thrown away when you confused my provision with your entitlement." I walked to the new electronic lock and typed in the new code. "The apartment is mine, effective today." "The old key is useless. Your belongings need to be removed by the end of the day." She watched me, defeated, finally understanding that she had lost the only valuable thing in the relationship: my quiet reliability. I walked out, leaving the sound of her genuine, heartbroken sobs echoing in the empty apartment. The trial was over. The verdict was in. The silence that followed the final meeting was the sound of my life being rebooted. I won't pretend I wasn't lonely at first. The apartment felt huge and empty, stripped of the furniture and the constant background noise of her digital life. But the emptiness wasn't painful, it was clean. Lena's immediate fallout was catastrophic. The spreadsheet I sent to her friend Maya and her mother had done irreversible damage. Maya, the friend, called me one last time, not for Lena, but for herself. "I saw the data, Lucas," she said quietly. "All those times she needed space. She was just avoiding bills. I'm sorry." That was the last true link to her old life. Lena was completely isolated. Her social support system, which she had systematically abused with requests for money and favors, dissolved the moment they saw the undeniable proof of her manipulation. She lost her job because her erratic behavior and constant need for emergency cash finally caught up with her professional image. The sophisticated language of self-care couldn't hide the fact that she was a financial liability. I, meanwhile, used the quiet. I threw myself back into my development work, the lack of relationship drama instantly improving my focus. I was promoted within 3 months. The money I recovered from our accounts was substantial. I used it to buy a small house outside the city, a place with a massive backyard, perfect for my quiet life. The walls were freshly painted and no room held the memory of a lie. I never sought revenge against Lena. I didn't need to. Her punishment was simply having to live the independent, accountable life she had always preached about but never actually performed. I heard through my former moving company, which handled her eventual small move, that she was forced to move back in with her parents, living in the small, cramped room she hadn't seen since college. She was left with her ideals, her philosophy, and the complete absence of a financial safety net. Sometimes I still think about that night, the sound of her key failing in the lock at 4 a.m. It wasn't the sound of her heartbreak, it was the sound of a system finally running its error-checking protocol and shutting down the fraudulent user. I look out at the stability I built, my quiet home, my secure job, my life free of emotional blackmail. I realized that by giving her the space she demanded, I had actually reclaimed the most important space of all: my own head. The life she sought after was a performance. The life I built is real, solid, and utterly peaceful.